Why solving healing PTSD and other illnesses is urgent. The first thing to understand is there are a couple of principles. Diseases that are not healed spread. Sometimes they will dilute. In other words, the goodness of the human spirit and our effort to understand, to love, to grow, to be creative, this is our nature. And sometimes that is enough without any formal diagnosis to heal a disease, a mental emotional disease. However, it cannot be relied upon, and having a couple of generations have to suffer the ripple effects of terror, shame, trauma, etc. being passed down is barbaric if it can be stopped. Few things are as hellish, few things are as miserable as a vulnerable, innocent, completely dependent child being terrorized to a point of insanity, broken trust, betrayal, hurt, pain, rage, helplessness, humiliation by the people charged with their care. And yet that is exactly what will happen when we don't heal PTSD in the current generation. It always gets passed on to the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable get the highest dose with the least protection. We've all been hurt and bothered by different symptoms of people suffering from mental and emotional disease. The label isn't even that important. Mental and emotional disease is viral. It spreads out. One terrified person can infect panic in a whole theater. Just fire, whatever it is. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. Panic spreads, it's viral. Shame spreads, rage spreads. If you're in a room that's enraged, you may not have felt rage or violent when you walked in, but by the time you leave, you want to kill someone. And that kind of rage is viral. It's also explosive. We need to heal it. And even more, the real opportunity is healing the environment that creates it. War is a disease. It does nothing but manipulate, cause suffering, wound, make people feel helpless, induce incredible grief, and then have no balm present to soothe that grief. So war is a disease. War is a disease that stems in some ways from PTSD. In other words, that narrow band focus that I've talked about. When we attach incredible weight and symbolic significance to a few small things because we can't tolerate or mentally digest the broad spectrum. Like in the broad spectrum of things, as free human beings, someone burns your flag, you can do a bow to what you honor in your country. This particular meditation place burns down, you don't have to hate and retaliate and kill people. You can meditate in your home or go to the burnt ashes and bow and honor that which is much bigger than the building. And the healing process can then start going back to those that committed the violence, who felt the helplessness, the rage, the hate that emerged and erupted into the symptom of violence. It can be healed, and we can understand it. Violence is always a symptom of hate and terror, and that hate and terror are always a symptom of helplessness, and that helplessness is always a symptom of either regression to ages in which trauma was stuck, or a symptom of an environment that is unjust, where there is so much power concentrated in a few people who, rather than using that power to serve and empower, are using that concentrated power to enslave and block. This creates rage. And violence, in its best sense of, perpetuating the species, is about destroying the power structure that has two ingredients. One, a very high concentration of power in a few people. And two, the power is used to perpetuate and consolidate the power rather than shared out and used to support the whole, the majority. Those are the two situations that create an endless loop unless violence interrupts it. Meaning, if you have someone who is in terror of losing power, i.e. they have the terror sickness as well, because generous, strong human beings with power share it. You watch a true king or a true queen, and everything about their being and dignity is about the love of their people. And you watch, the current Thai king. I think, the last Thai king is dead. But when I would go to Thailand and hear the stories of that king's love for the people and the love for the people of the king, it's truly beautiful to behold. I have not found that reverence anywhere on the planet, and yet it's there when a concentration of power is used primarily to serve and bless and raise everyone up who is affected by that power in an equitable way. Rage and violence occurs when the opposite occurs, when you have someone in power who is so afraid, who has the virus of fear, the virus of greed, which is a fear virus. There's never going to be enough. I'm going to lose it all in the end. I've got to have more. I've got to have more. This is a virus. This is a dis-ease. When that's concentrated and held on with control, with violence, with an aggressive assertiveness rather than being elected and blessed because of their good action, you get violence, which then interrupts the cycle. So violence can interrupt other violence, but it can't fully heal the virus of violence, which is a symptom of the virus of pain, rage, helplessness, and terror. Those are the viral emotional states that lead to violence. You don't get confident, warm, kind, powerful people who can do what they need to do and believe in without violence, adopting violence. You just don't get it. Violence is symptomatic of something quite different, which is emotional disease. Emotional disease can be induced by a sick environment in which every healthy, honest expression that comes out is attacked and suppressed and shamed and pushed down on every level. So when you have young people growing up who are abused and who are not being supported and who are being lied to and who are being betrayed, you have their healthy anger and hurt and rage being spoken, and they are humiliated, shamed, further betrayed, further lied to, pushed down, punished, put in prison. You crystallize You don't heal that emotion. You crystallize it, and it's going to be symptomatic and show up in violence. It's perfectly obvious and simple throughout the history of the human race. It's normal. It's to be expected. The only thing that's absurd is if people with a concentration of power, using that power to perpetuate their own power or their elite minority, are surprised when it's not appreciated by everyone else. It's a bit of a joke. So in the healing, we need to heal these things because it leads to violence. Violence is always more expensive than treatment. So the economics do not add up to not treating this, however expensive. So here's the joke. So that we don't have enough money to treat it. Well, then you don't have enough money not to treat it. It's that simple. Because if you really don't have enough money to treat it and you don't have enough money not to treat it, you end up dead because you have no resources. But the truth is we have plenty of resources. It's just we allocate them all to military. Like the U.S. currently has 500% bigger military budget than anyone else on the whole planet. We allocate the money there. And so the military can respond, but the military cannot heal a single person, either in the military. Just think how heartbreaking it is to be someone in the military, to instinctively know what your population is going through, and be paid and used to mow down, intimidate, oppress, block the freedom and the voice of your own people. That is a destructive, wrenching apart feeling for anyone in the military who has any shred of connection to their feeling. If they don't, they're lost to sociopathic viral states already. They are too sick. If they are not fully sick, the part that is healthy will feel grief, will feel conflict internally. That internal conflict weakens. It confuses them. It makes them vulnerable to the diseases of meaninglessness. What's the point of life if it's just to oppress and humiliate our own citizens when we were enlisted to protect the American ideals we're now being used to suppress? This is of a sickness that comes whenever power through violence is turned on its own population. We don't have the money not to heal these issues. Even aside from the fact that solving a crime, like people will spend millions of dollars of public money on some lawsuit and crime investigation, but say we don't have enough money to understand the emotions of every person in that town. It would not cost that much. A few crime investigations pivoted to understanding where is emotional dis-ease most concentrated. Who has the most rage, terror, hate, fear, need to hurt in the whole town? We're not going to punish you. We're going to look at how that disease came about, and we're going to heal that condition. It doesn't take millions and millions. It may take one kind neighbor who tends that disease by being polite and kind. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you were close to the edge, and then one person picked up your grocery bags, and it all melted away. One person picking up your grocery bags. In other words, this is not a law enforcement problem. It's not a health problem. It's a human kindness problem. It's a human ignorance problem. And there are things that we can do in science and in health to sort this out. But by and large, this is a human kindness problem. And it's the same, like I see it in landscaping, where there's another bias, but I won't get too distracted with that right now. We need to treat illness, dis-ease, on a mental, emotional level before it becomes a physical violence level. Like you could say that I need meds right now, but you could also say that the level of terror and hate and rage and helplessness that left my father feeling good to drag me around in a sack, to leave me out in the forest and say he was never coming back, to whip me within absolute terror with a belt, to threaten me with punishing Christian gods, and induce an awareness where I was all alone. No one stood by me, no one heard, no one wanted to hear. So this is isolating an infant from 0 to 5 years old, complete isolation, complete terror, and never knowing when and why, and it had nothing to do with me. At that level, my condition wasn't medical. It didn't need any science. It needed one human being to stand up. One human being to look in my eyes and say, that child is in terror. Why? And what can I do about it? That's what it needed. The fact that we are so deprived and weak in that kind of care, which is a relatively new phenomena, is the concern. It's not concern that a 0 to 5-year-old who is tortured, terrorized, humiliated erratically, made to feel crazy and ignored by every person around them feels terrified. You would be inhuman if you didn't. That is not to be wondered at. There's nothing wrong with those feelings. What's wrong is, why is it okay for an adult who has those feelings to go undetected, and for it to be okay not to put detection systems in place? I.e., there's no census for how people are feeling. There's no cultural support if someone is feeling grief. Like, I've watched my father in absolute agony. It's like I would not want any human being to be in that state. And there is no place where I can send him to receive loving support. I can't give it to him because of what's come at me from him. It's too easily re-triggered. But where can he go? Who cares? People have watched that on his face in this culture for decades. Why is he allowed to have a child? Why is that okay with you? That you would probably vote that everyone has the automatic right to have a child. But why? Why is a sick person who has an 80% probability of taking that out? I mean, you can't protect an infant if you've got a sick parent, any more than you've got the flu. I mean, we separate babies. We do cessections. We say, you cannot hold this baby because you are sick, not because you are bad, not because this is your fault, not because you're fundamentally flawed, but because you were sick, because that happened to my father when he was young. But why are these sicknesses able to continue, and how expensive is it? Because my father was brilliant. But he got so caught up in his own insanity without any safe place to go, mingled with all of his rage and hate and all that, that he resigned from being a currency hedge fund manager, resigned and just took tail. He was a leader of a charity, the Cultural Freedom Fund. None of that mattered. It was consumed with his sickness. And it didn't need medicine, I don't believe, when he was young either. I believe it needed caring adults who cared about his feelings and who made him feel safe and who gave him a template of parenting as being about protecting the vulnerable and the innocent rather than terrorizing them. He didn't get that. He was a terrified, terrorized boy. And I, as an emotional man, talking about this stuff, this is the fucked up thing about American culture. I can say something like this, where in Thailand or in a feminine culture, they would be weeping at the cruelty, at the numbness, at the absurdity of a country that has so much and can't take care of its own people, can't take care of its own feelings. There would be weeping. It's not what I got in America. It's, oh, tell me about this interesting thing, but do you think Prozac would help? It's a complete dissociation, a disowning of every emotion. And so it continues, because that is the disease to begin with, is dissociation, numbness, turning the other way in passionate blindness. It is a disease. It's not the disease of the individual. So that is expensive, I believe. That numbness on a broader spectrum is very expensive because we can't be liquidly creative. We can't be courageous. Courage comes when we're emotionally healthy, not terrorized and traumatized. You get great heroism amongst all kinds of people who are traumatized and terrorized, because you shouldn't expect anything when you're sick like that. And yet we are so heroic as a culture, as individuals in these states. And yet there's so much more creativity and abundance and flow and ease and joy that would make growing our economy, reduce our health expenses, many of which are mental, emotional related. And the statistics coming in, as far as I can reading all the books, drugs do not heal. They suspend symptoms of the underlying emotional dis-ease. That's the reality. We're spending trillions and set to spend more to just suspend symptoms and leave people in the underlying emotional misery. Is that really good enough? Is it practical? Is it economical? Is it constitutional, the right to pursue happiness? Is that really it, the right to suspend dread and the symptoms of dread and terror, the symptoms of a lack of trust? I meet so many people who don't trust. They don't trust and aren't upset that they live in a world where they can't trust. And they can't even trust the person to say why and how they don't trust them, because that would be too vulnerable, because they're going to be humiliated by someone who has the disease of helplessness and smallness and is waiting to pass that emotion on to anyone else who's vulnerable. Oh, you've got some real openness and vulnerability? Let me jab you with my feelings of smallness and helplessness, because I'll get to feel a little bit bigger for about 5 minutes while I'm doing it. And then you're left with my virus. This is how and why it spreads. So we need communities. We need intelligence. We need honesty. We need to cut out these lies that are pretending that we don't have the money to heal, when the reality is that we're spending the money to very brutally and crudely clean up the mess at an enormous unnecessary expense that is exacerbating the problem. Because when the problem is emotional disease, you think it helps when your families are chopped up and put in prison, when you don't trust your own government, when you're lied to, and when more and more of your tax money is taken and we're told constantly we don't have enough money for humanity? We just have enough money to shoot you if you don't do all these weird things? We have people on the street, people living in their cars, and we're spending our police money harassing them. I've met 5 people in the last year alone, many of them Americans, who are in constant tension between our tax money. They just can't cope with the barrage of mixed messages, the barrage of dis-ease emotionally and mentally, all the craziness going on, and the laws, and then they're coping. They're taking care of themselves. They're not hurting anyone. They're contributing well-being. They've brought well-being to me. And sometimes, what we need in PTSD is patient time. The woman that helped me the most in the U.S. lived out of her car. She had patient time because she wasn't rushing around endlessly paying a mortgage that she couldn't afford. She had patient time. And that's what I needed. And rather than our culture supporting her for supporting me, so that I don't have to send all my money overseas and can actually stay in the U.S. and feel healthy, she's being harassed by my tax dollars who don't want her living in her car. Why not? Why isn't she getting help rather than being harassed and made to feel more and more unwelcome and invisible? Why? There's no good reason other than that certain people don't want to feel mildly uncomfortable with the reality that some people are having a really hard time. I could easily be among them. I'm not. I have the incredible luxury of sitting here in a 5-star hotel with a $1,000 phone, with high-speed internet, with people that will, come and go and make me comfortable, an amazing girlfriend who loves me, owning a company. But all of these resources are not enough for me to stay fully healthy in the U.S. within the current social climate. So I feel like I'm kind of going into a smoke zone, making $20,000 and coming and spending half of it while the other burns up on my expensive, elaborate house that I have to keep just so, because any change and a lack of control in that would fry me up with anxiety. And that's the best that I've come up with to solve this problem on an individual level that could so much more efficiently be solved on a community level. On a community level where rather than avoiding me because I'm a little intense, neighbors engage. They don't. I've invited 3 or 4 of my neighbors to dinner, and apparently it's got out that I'm not entirely appropriate in all dinner situations, and this being a upper class, very wealthy neighborhood, we don't need that kind of person in this at dinner events. So I have one after another kind of politely telling me that they can't possibly have dinner or whatever, or get to know each other. So there's this fragmentation. And so I feel isolated in my own community. And that's okay in this country. That's what we do with people who have a disease. It's not intelligent, it's not kind, it's very expensive. I don't know, how many people are spending money on drugs rather than the economy as their way because they can't buy paradise the way I can. They buy it the way they can on drugs. Drugs are not the problem. They're the solution in a sick culture. How many people are spending it on porn and various and dissociating even further, and then they're losing their sense of who they really are. Porn is not the problem. It's a kind of crude, somewhat solution to the need to focus obsessively on something that feels good, as opposed to being left in this anxiety that feels terrifying. We need to understand that. And we need to realize that far from not having enough to understand and care about emotions and human beings and feelings, first of all, we have tons in the military budget. And thirdly, it's cheaper. Way, way, way. It's about pennies on the dollar to prevent than to treat. Pennies on the dollar. But does that even matter? Let's say it was the other way around, that you could prevent 20% of the population from going through hell, either at some point in their life or their whole life, depending on how you do it. There's 20% of the population in emotional, mental hell at any given point. So let's say you could prevent that, and it was really expensive. Is it worth it? I'd pay it in a heartbeat. But it's actually not that way. It's actually pennies on the dollar to prevent than to treat. I know that because I've spent $250K treating and responding, and I'm just keeping pace because the science and the technology and the emotional and cultural support isn't there. So I spend my $1,000 on therapy and then come home with neighbors that turn their eyes away from me because they don't want to be honest with me about why they don't want to engage. And I may sound, a little bit crazy, but it's more just, when you're really flooded with all of this stuff, I go out and change my garbage cans in my pajamas. Well, that's not quite the way things are done. I don't focus on keeping busy. They all know that I kind of take at least half the year off. Well, that's not quite the American way. So there's all these little things where I'm just not doing the socially normal things. So the socially normal clique is not very happy about that. I've just met one really innovative software designer who lives in my neighborhood. She loves the fact that I've got time. She's retired, and she's trying to combat this same thing, this American isolationism that she doesn't meet as an entrepreneur traveling around the world, which I don't see there. I don't see it in Brazil. I don't see it in Denmark. I don't see it in Thailand. I see it less in Italy, some of the happiest places that I can go. And yet I see it most in America, or I should say my segment of the San Francisco Bay Area, which is apparently one of the wealthiest counties in the country. So that kind of concludes my summary, but I'll